Hey everybody, welcome back to Ready Steady Play, where I have got another rules video for you. I'm doing Shaolia, Warring States. And this is a Kickstarter prototype game. You've probably found this video through the Kickstarter or because you subscribe to the channel. What I'm going to do is I'm going to teach you the rules of Shaolia in brief so that you have an understanding of how it works and you can decide whether it's something you would like to back on Kickstarter. Shaolia is a tableau building game that takes roughly 30 to 60 minutes that pits players in a head-to-head or 2v2 team mode. We are each controlling a sort of medieval warring state. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a rundown of all of the components in the box and how to set them out as well. And also where the rules specific to each scenario influence the setup of the game. So let's open up the box and have a look at what's inside. So first up, we've each got an encampment. This is where we're going to have our state, and each state has a palace attached to it. More about the palaces later on, but you can see they are down here. We've got two more boards, but we're only going to set up two for the moment because the 1v1 head-to-head is the most common type of scenario, at least in the prototype version of the game. But we have two more just in case we want to play the 2v2 team mode. Then what we've got is this trade board, and this board is going to tell us what trades we're going to be able to do during the game. We've got a little deck of trader cards, which we are going to put out here, and the cards that we put out from this deck onto the trader board will depend on the scenario we pick. Next up, what we've got is two decks of cards. We've got these golden level 2 buildings and these blue level 1 buildings. In every scenario, we use all of the level 1 buildings, so we can just give those a shuffle and just put out the deck, making sure we leave space for a discard pile. We've also got these level 2 buildings. Now, based on which scenario you're playing, you may be called upon to select different sets of buildings to include in the level 2 deck. There's lots of different kinds of buildings, and they're not all present in every scenario, although some scenarios allow you to use this entire deck for the most randomization. So you'll construct your deck of level 2 cards based on the scenario instructions. Once you've assembled your deck of level 2 cards, put it down, leave space for a discard pile, and flip 3 face up to form a marketplace. We've also got these forest cards, and when we're setting up the game, we're going to put one here in the top left space, and one here in the bottom right space. And we'll set these up on both player boards. Each player is going to get 3 dice. Put the rest of the dice out to form a pool. We've got money here, 1s and 5s. Give each player a certain amount depending on the scenario. In this case, I'm going to give each player 5 coins and the rest out to form a pool. Next up, we've got officers, these tiny little guys with swords, and we'll just put them out to form a collective pool. They're a resource. Make the pool. Don't wreck your board. We've got these minerals. They're another resource. Just put them somewhere nearby the board and form a pool. This is a culture marker. Each player is going to put one on their board to track their culture. We've got some wound tokens. Put them somewhere nearby where everyone can grab them. We've got some lock tokens. Same story. What we've got here are life tokens. Put them out somewhere nearby where people can reach them. And we've got attack tokens. Make sure they're nearby somewhere where people can reach them. We've also got these character cards. The scenario will tell you whether or not these are in use and how many to give each player. We're going to give each player 2. In the prelude tutorial mode, you don't use them. But I'm going to teach you how to use them so that you know when you get to your own scenarios. Last but not least, we've got the first player token. Give this to the player who looks the most regal and they will begin the game. And with that, we've pretty much set up Shaolia. Now, what I'm not going to do is talk you through every scenario in the game and how it differs. So I'll put out some random trade points here because it doesn't really matter for the purpose of this tutorial. What I will teach you is how to use all of the buildings in the game, how to set them up, how the gameplay functions, how the turn structure functions, and how to access all these different things. In Shaolia, you will find that there are 2 main objectives that can win you the game. The first is to reach 18 culture points. If you get to 18 culture, you win the game. The other is to destroy your opponent's palace. Palaces have 12 hit points, and if the palace takes 12 damage and is destroyed, you win the game. Or rather, if you destroy your opponent's palace, you win the game. If your palace is destroyed, you lose the game. When someone achieves a victory condition, the game ends immediately and they immediately win. Some scenarios add different kinds of victory conditions. For example, scenario number 3, Overwhelming Power, also states that you win if you construct 3 wonders, which are special level 2 buildings that are incredibly powerful. The game takes place over the course of 3 phases. The first phase is the purchase phase, in which you will buy resources and buildings. The second phase is the build phase, in which you will build the buildings that you've purchased in the purchase phase. And the final phase is the action phase, where buildings will activate, bringing in more resources and also allowing you to attack your opponent. So the first thing that happens in the purchase phase is that the player with the flag will make all of their purchases first. Then the other player will do all of their purchasing, back to the first player for building, then over to the second player for building, and so on. At the end of the round, the flag will alternate. So immediately after completing their actions, the player that finished will then start their next purchase phase. This will go back and forth until someone has achieved a victory condition. So with that in mind, let's start by looking at the first phase, the purchase phase. In the purchase phase, there are 4 things that you can buy. You can buy level 1 buildings, you can buy level 2 buildings, you can buy officers, and you can buy dice. I'll go through these in order, explaining how they work. This first look is going to be at the level 1 building cards, and this is basically going to be an introduction to how the buildings work. So this is going to be the longest part of this phase's rules explanation. As a civilization game, you'll find many different kinds of cards in the level 1 deck here. So here we've got the 6 different kinds of buildings in the level 1 building deck. And this is very convenient because it also represents the 6 different kinds of buildings you'll find in the game. You've got culture buildings, which bear this symbol of the culture symbol in the top left corner. You've got economic buildings like the farm with a coin in the top left. You've got trading buildings like the market with the boat in the top left. Down here we've got military, which have the cross sword symbol. We've got defensive buildings, which have the shield. And we've got the mineral buildings here. Yep. So in their basic form, there's 8 copies of each of the cards in the basic deck, so 48 cards total at level 1. And you pretty much play with these in every single version of the game. The only difference between the buildings in each of these stacks is the die at the bottom of the card. But each one has a very different ability. The way it's going to work is you're going to purchase these from the deck in the purchase phase. In the build phase, you're going to build them on your board, and in the action phase, you're going to roll dice and then assign these dice to the different buildings to achieve different effects. The culture buildings always give you culture, helping you to progress along the culture track to your cultural victory. The economic buildings always give you money. You'll need money to purchase building cards and things like that, and you'll also need them to build the buildings. The markets allow you to trade, which allows you to interact with the trade board. The infantry do damage, and damage will wound the hit points on the building cards, so they destroy stuff. Defense cards protect against the military cards, and they must be attacked before any of your other buildings. The blacksmiths help you generate the mineral resources, which you'll need to win the game. When we start getting to the level 2 buildings, we'll see that everything fits into these categories again. They're just a lot more powerful versions. So in the purchase phase, if you want to purchase a level 1 card, you spend 1 coin, return it to the supply, and just take 1 card, which goes into your hand. You can have any number of cards in your hand at any given time. There's no limit. But you've got to be careful, because this money will also be used to build the buildings. So if you spend it all purchasing cards in the purchasing phase, you cannot build any buildings in the building phase. When it comes to the level 1 cards, you're always top decking them. If you want to purchase level 2 cards, you must take it from the level 2 marketplace down here at the bottom. In order to acquire a level 2 card, you must trade in 3 cards of any other kind, which means you could trade in 3 level 1 cards, 3 level 2 cards, or any combination. When you trade in the 3 cards, you put them in their respective discard piles, and then you take one of the cards that you want, putting it into your hand. Once you've purchased a card, it's immediately replaced. If you don't like any of the level 2 cards, you can spend 1 coin to burn the whole marketplace and reset it to something you might like better. These ones with the special borders are wonders, and we'll talk about those a bit later. The other 2 things you can purchase in the purchase step are die and officers. If you want to purchase officers, you must pay a mineral. You return it to the supply and you take 2 officers and put them on your player board. Officers are kind of like a resource that you'll spend in the action phase. I'll explain that later. There are other ways to acquire officers outside of buying them with minerals in the purchase phase, but we'll get to that as it becomes relevant. If you want to buy a die, you must spend 4 coins. Just take 4 coins, return them to the supply, take 1 die and add it to your pool. And I'll explain what that does in the action phase. But that's it, the 4 purchasing things. So then we're into the build phase. In the build phase, you're going to build the building cards from your hand. Now we're in the build phase, the first player will do all of their building, and then the second player will do all of their building. So we'll have a look at some of these cards and talk about how you build them. So here we've got an infantry card. If we want to build this infantry card, we must pay a coin. We pay the coin and return it to the supply. We can then take the infantry card and put it anywhere onto our player board. Any building can go anywhere on the player board, with the exception of defensive buildings. Defensive buildings must go in your front row. So long as you have the money, you can build as many buildings as you like, but you've got to remember that some buildings are more expensive than others. Additionally, a building like the gym, which is a level 2 building, cannot be built unless you have an infantry or cavalry building to precede it. Wonders typically don't have prerequisites in order to build them, but they are extremely expensive. And that's it for building buildings. It's actually very simple, but obviously, once you understand what they all do, it's going to be a lot more to think about. There's 2 other things you can do in the build phase. You can clear forests and demolish buildings. Demolishing buildings is easy. Just take a building from your player board and discard it. That's it. If you want to clear a forest, you just pay 3 coins, and then you remove it from your player board. So those are the 3 actions you'll do in the build phase. Then we'll move on to the action phase. The action phase is where our tableau comes to life. Let me set up some buildings for our players here. So here we've got a player board ready to go in the action phase. Now, when you're playing in the action phase, you'll do all of your actions as the first player, and then it will be up to the other player to do all of their actions. And this can be very important given stuff like military that causes direct conflicts. The very first thing you'll do is roll all of your dice. Each player has 3 dice by default that they'll get every time, plus any dice that they purchased in the purchase phase of the game. Note that any die you purchased will be used only once, and then at the end of the action phase discarded. So before we roll the dice, you'll note that we've got a gym here with a P ability on it. P abilities are what are called passive abilities. They're always in effect and must always be taken into consideration. For example, the fortress passive ability means that it must be attacked before anything else. All defensive buildings have this ability. This garden says that you gain a culture when you activate another culture building on your board. And the gym says, place 1 attack token on an attack card before rolling dice. So we'll take this attack token, and I'll explain these later, but we'll put it down here on this infantry card in order to buff it. And then we'll roll all the dice. And now what we're going to do is we're going to assign these dice to the buildings here on our player board. Some buildings only have 1 die space on them, which means that you can use their ability by putting down a single die. If I want to put a die here on the infantry, I can do that, and then I can act and resolve their ability. So in the case of them, I would pick a building on my opponent's board and deal 1 damage. This attack bonus is discarded to add an additional damage and must be used now. They have this barricade, which I must kill first. It's got 2 hit points, so my infantry destroys it with their 1 bonus. For every building destroyed, I gain 1 gold for looting it. And now I've resolved the attack of the infantry. If you ever need to track wounds on a building, you can just take the wound tokens and put them down here to note that the building has been hit. A school is very simple. It's got gain a culture. So I can put a 4 down here, and I'll just move 1 up the culture track. Remember, if I get to 18, I win the game. Some more complex buildings have different kinds of die spaces. This is the Ancestral Valley, which is the epic culture wonder. It's very unlikely you would have this early in the game. This is a late game construction. But it's got this any space that says gain 2 culture, and that just means you can put any number down there to activate that. It's also got this gain 7 culture space, which has 2 dice. So you must have the correct 2 faces, and you can put those down there to activate that ability. Note that you cannot activate both, so if you take this one, you cannot use the other one. And note that passive abilities do not conflict with active abilities, so this will always be in effect even when I use this one with a die. We've also got 3 abilities along the bottom here. These are your palace abilities. They all cost any die face, so you can always use these. And unlike buildings like the Ancestral Valley, which has 2 abilities that you must choose from, you can activate all 3 of the abilities at your palace if you want. This ensures you'll never have any wasted die that you cannot use, because you can always put 1 down here to gain 2 gold or 2 officers. If you do put a die down here to gain 2 officers, you will immediately gain those 2 officers and they can be spent right away. Officers can be spent in the action phase to increase or decrease the face of a die by 1 step. So if you need a 3 because you want to activate your market, you can spend an officer to immediately turn this into a 3. The officer is then returned to the supply. You can modify the same dice more than once if you want, and you can also go from a 1 to a 6 and vice versa. The dice is cyclical. So if we put our 3 down here, we can activate our market, which gives us a trade ability. It says trade once. When you trade, you pick one of the actions on this board here, which will have different actions on it depending on the scenario you're playing. We have 8 current spaces we can use, but you may have less depending on your scenario. Because we are trading once, we can pick just one of these actions to perform immediately. Each action has a different ability on it. For example, this one allows us to take level 1 cards from the discard pile. This costs 1 coin to take a card, and we can do it a maximum of twice per activation. Once you've resolved all of your action dice, then it is up to the other opponent to roll their dice and resolve their actions. Once everybody's resolved all of their actions, any dice that are over 3 are returned to the pool. The remaining 3 dice are returned to the player's supply. The first player marker is changed, and it's ready to begin the next round. We've got a few other little bits and pieces here. Some things lock buildings. This is a padlock token. If this comes down on a building in your tableau, you must use a appropriate action die to unlock that building, but instead of gaining the benefit, you'll just remove the padlock. If one of your buildings is damaged, you can heal it by applying life tokens, like on this fortress card. If you gain 2 life tokens, you can go over your max hit points. You'll heal any wounds you've got first, and then the extra hit points are marked with these life tokens here. You can even have life tokens on your palace. We already covered these attack tokens. Anything that puts out attack tokens onto military cards increases their damage by 1 for the next attack. It should be noted that you can never have more than 2 tokens on a specific card at any given time. The last thing we're going to look at really quickly is the character cards. There are 2 kinds of character cards. You've got the Rich Baby, who's called an immediate character card. This character comes with an ability on it that can be used at any time on your turn, and it has an immediate effect. The other kind is like a passive character who's added next to your player board. They don't occupy a space on your player board, but they act like a building. So the Alchemist says you must build this card immediately. So that means that you have to reveal it on your first turn at the earliest opportunity. You can then use the 5 to gain a mineral and the 6 to gain gold. So she acts as kind of like a farm and a blacksmith simultaneously. You'll note that she has a single hit point, so she can be killed by military cards. If you don't want to build the Alchemist, instead of building her immediately, you can immediately sell her for 4 gold. Ability cards you can hang on to for as long as you like, but if at some point in the game you decide you don't want to use them, you can also sell it to gain 4 gold. The game will tell you how many character cards you start with, and they'll be dealt to you randomly face down. And believe it or not, that's actually it for Shaolia. And there are 5 scenarios just in this prototype. And that includes the 2v2 team game, something called Trade Wars, which adds in this sort of caravan mechanic and this extra trading stuff that focuses a lot more on this board. You've got this one called Overwhelming Power, which adds in the wonders and creates a sort of a really tense game of back and forth based on just the composition of this level 2 deck. The second scenario is called Rush, and that's really geared up to sort of powering up really quickly, and it's a much quicker game than the others, which take a bit longer. There's a 6th scenario that the designer actually sent to me via email called Rumble, which just throws in all the level 2 cards, and that's really cool because it creates this really sort of like big space to play in with all these potentially viable strategies. So if this has you interested, please come back tomorrow while I'll be sitting down with my friend Ollie to play a game of Shaolia. We're going to play Scenario 3, Overwhelming Power, and we're going to see who can come out the top in warring states. So I hope this has really helped give you some insight into how the game works, and that you'll join us tomorrow for the playthrough. Thanks for watching, everyone!